Hi, sorry for being late. Let me know if you can see me, if you can hear me. Hello. Yes, I think I am very much here. Without further ado, let's get into our lesson. As always, I am Shree. I am your English educator for grade 11 on this channel. We meet every day from, let me just draw it for you and let me use like a happier color today. I don't like red, it's so bright. Okay, we meet every day from 7 to 8 p.m. I am late today. I sometimes am late, unfortunately. My laptop is extremely dysfunctional, and delays end up happening. But we're going to be doing quite an exciting lesson today. It's Landscape of the Soul. Before we get into it, I just want to let you know that there's something called the Unacademy Combat Scholarship Test. There is a link for it in my description box. I think if it's not there in the description box, you can go and like type it out on Google, Unacademy Combat. You can sign up for it until like tonight. Tomorrow is when the test actually happens. It happens at 1 p.m. Is it tomorrow actually? Oh, it happens on 26th, so it's day after tomorrow. And it happens at 1 p.m. and it's actually not for 45 minutes anymore. It is now for 60 minutes, but it's only 60 minutes long, and you will get to like do it for absolutely like no money. It's absolutely free of cost, and you can take the test and you stand the chance of winning scholarships worth up to 1 crore. It's also like a great chance for you to sort of revise a bunch of things, so you should go ahead and give it a shot, because the only thing it asks of you is really just some time and some, attention. Otherwise, yeah, pretty much all you stand to gain from it is like a lot of benefits. So enroll for the test. You can enroll for it, as I said, either using the link in my description, or if that's not there, then you can type it out on Google and you can go ahead and enroll for the test. It's also fun to like do competitive tests sometimes. That really depends on the kind of person you are, but it can be a challenge. Okay, as always, we're going to be reading each of the paragraphs, we're going to be understanding them and then discussing some themes that we see from them. This lesson is interesting, but it's also quite dry in the sense that it is extremely informative, and it can be like a little bit complicated in moments. So if there's something that you find that you're not understanding, then let me know in the chat and I will be keeping an eye out for it, and I will definitely reply to you on whatever questions you may have. Also let me know if like something I say isn't very clear to you, and I can definitely like repeat it or clarify it, anything like that. All of that said, Landscape of the Soul by Natalie Trobroy. Landscape of the Soul. This is interesting because landscape is, when you put a sheet of paper, it's generally like, okay, that's very clean. You generally hold it like this, and this is like portrait. And if you put it like this, it's landscape. And generally, like landscape also refers to like scenery, art on like things like mountains, things like rivers, things like the environment around you. So landscape refers to all of those things here, and this very much is an article, a piece about like painting, but it's also a piece about the landscape of the soul, which is to say it's not just the external like sort of landscapes that we see outside us and around us, but also the features and the characteristics of what is inside us, the spirit of us, so to speak. So here we're going to be talking very much about landscape painting, and we're going to simultaneously be talking about the features of the soul, or if you were going to take a journey within your soul, what would the terrain of your soul look like, right? So the landscape of your internal being. So that's what the title is referring to. That's why it's called Landscape of the Soul. Natalie Trobroy is from Belgium. She is an art historian, and she has written this essay which is called Landscape of the Soul, Ethics and Spirituality in Chinese Painting. And this is the piece that has been extracted for us in the form of Landscape of the Soul, and that's what we're going to be reading today. But this longer title tells us something of what we're going to learn today, which is about the ethics, the morals, the guiding principles of Chinese painting, and spirituality, or how Chinese painting is deeply concerned with things like the spirit, with things like how we live and how to best balance our spirit and achieve what we want to do in life, or achieve what they believe is best for us to achieve in life as per their philosophy. So a bunch of the things that we're going to be talking about is right in this title. And let us start. A wonderful old tale is told about the painter Wu Daozi, who lived in the 8th century. His last painting was a landscape commissioned by the Tang Emperor Xuanzong to decorate a palace wall. The master had hidden his work behind a screen, so only the emperor could see it. So we start with a story, right? And the story is about a painter. It's a painter called Wu Daozi. He lived many centuries ago, and it's about his very last painting, and we'll find out why this was his last painting at some point in the story. And this last painting is a landscape painting, and he's done it for an emperor, and he's done it on a palace wall. He's done it to decorate the palace wall, so it's like hanging a painting on the wall. And he's hidden his painting behind a screen, and he invites the emperor to come see it privately. For a long while, the emperor admired the wonderful scene, discovering forests, high mountains, waterfalls, clouds floating in an immense sky, men on hilly paths, birds in flight. All of these things are in the painting that Wu Daozi has painted. Waterfalls, mountains, forests, clouds, men, birds. It's a very detailed painting. It's a very intensive painting. And one thing we get immediately from this paragraph is first the idea of patronage. There is generally someone who pays you in order to do your art, and very often in olden times it used to be emperors who commissioned artists and got them to paint for them. So that's one idea that we get in this. Another idea that we get in this is the idea that Wu Daozi is clearly quite good at painting, and he is very good at detail-oriented art, right? "Look, sire," said the painter, "in this cave at the foot of the mountain dwells a spirit." The painter clapped his hands, and the entrance to the cave opened. "The inside is splendid, beyond anything words can convey. Please let me show your majesty the way." And then the painter says, "Look, in the cave, in this painting, which is at the foot of the mountain in the painting, there is a spirit." And this immediately takes us to the title of the story, which is Landscape of the Soul. Spirit is sometimes spirit is known as, it's a being, right? It's a spirit, that's a being, that's an otherworldly being. But spirit also doubles to refer to the soul, and so the soul comes in here in a little bit. And the painter sort of claps his hands, and the cave opens. The cave in the painting opens, and the painter's like, "Look, inside that cave, it's really beautiful, and it's so beautiful that my words aren't enough to describe it for you. So I'm going to show you the way. Come with me." It's an invitation for the king to walk inside the cave, inside the painting, with him. The painter entered the cave, but the entrance closed behind him, and before the astonished emperor could move or utter a word, the painting had vanished from the wall. And the painter walks inside the painting, and the cave entrance closes behind him, and the emperor is just standing there outside the painting, staring, awestruck. He can't move, he can't even speak a word. The entire painting sort of disappears. Not a trace of Wu Daozi's brush was left, and the artist was never seen again in this world. And this is why this is the last painting of Wu Daozi. The artist disappears into his painting, and then he is never again seen in the world outside, and not even a trace of his brush is left, which which is to say, all of the paint marks that he'd made with his brush on that painting, all of it has disappeared. Like, there's not a trace of that painting left at all, and there's no trace of the artist left at all either. And this gives us, like, immediately we're tempted to think of this story as fictional, right? Because something fantastical seems to be going on here. A painter enters a painting, and then the painting vanishes, and it takes the painter with him. And this has like a deeper meaning to it, which we'll come to when we discuss how the Chinese think about art, think about painting, what their understanding of painting is. But for now, you should just note this down and keep it in mind. Couple of themes. We get straight from the bat of this like piece, what we get is this mysterious story that isn't entirely explained to us about a painter and a king, which involves a spirit, which takes us back to the idea of the landscape of the soul. And again, we get like this really nice line that's sort of like, not a trace of his brush was left, which is to say not even like a little bit of the painting was left, as I've already told you. Such stories played an important part in China's classical education. The books of Confucius and Zhuangzi are full of them. They help the master to guide his disciple in the right direction. So anecdotes, which are short stories like this, are very important to China and education in China, and classical education, to say education in the olden times, but also the more traditional aspect of Chinese education, which is linked to philosophy. The author, Natalie Trobroy, tells us about Confucius and Zhuangzi, and Zhuangzi is this book of philosophy. Confucius is a philosopher who's written a book. And the books in both of these philosophical disciplines are full of stories, and they're full of stories for the master to guide the disciple, which is to say that these philosophies are taken really seriously, right? They're ways of life for these people. And what happens is that one person gets really well versed in the stories and in the philosophy, and they reach the ends of the philosophy, and then they kind of help other people reach that end. And to help those other people, what exists are those stories. It's like the Panchatantra, right? When you're children, you're told the Panchatantra in order to give you like certain morals for you to grow up with. And just like that, all of these stories are supposed to give certain like meanings, ideas, understandings about the world to the people who are studying these philosophies. And these philosophies are indeed like so important that people are taught them and people are trained in them. It's like, think about like ashrams and how in them you're sort of like taught like the like elements of your discipline so that you can be like more balanced in your life, right? So something like that. Think, say, maybe about Buddhism and how to become a Buddhist and the sort of work that you need to put in, and how you read like the works and you adopt like the path. Yeah, something like that. There's a path to like travel if you go on to learn Confucius, if you want to commit to being to learning Confucianism, or if you want to like engage with the philosophy of Zhuangzi. And to go down that path, you have these books full of stories. Beyond the anecdote, they are deeply revealing of the spirit in which art was considered. So beyond just the fact that it's a story and it's a story that kind of allows for this kind of learning, it also tells us something about the way that these Chinese people thought of art. Contrast this story or another famous one about a painter who wouldn't draw the eye of a painting of a dragon he had painted for fear it would fly out of the painting, with an old story from my native Flanders that I find most representative of Western painting. And Natalie Trobroy says, contrast this story of Wu Dozi with the story that I'm going to tell you about my native Flanders. And in this like bracket of Wu Dozi, she also puts another thing, which is this story about a painter who refuses to like draw an eye onto a dragon that he paints, because he thinks very much that if he paints the eye of the dragon, then the dragon will fly out of the painting. Why does she put the Wu Dozi story and the story about the dragon in the same bracket? It's because she's trying to tell us, she's hinting at that sort of like supernatural sort of otherworldliness to the painting, right? In one, Wu Dozi enters the painting. In another, the painter is afraid that the dragon is going to exit the painting. So the link that they both share is that something almost like beyond the norm happens with regard to painting in both of those stories. And in contrast to both of those stories is a story that the author is going to tell us. Some themes that we get from this paragraph. One is really just that stories are a way to teach and a way to like think about different ideas, and that's what we do when we study literature, right? We're trying to learn new things, and we're trying to track different ideas and see what's going on in a story and kind of adopt ideas from the story through paying attention to the story. That's kind of how these Chinese philosophies use stories also. And another thing that we get is that the author wants to contrast Chinese art with art from Belgium, so Eastern art with Western art. And the suggestion that comes from this is that there are different styles of art in both of these places, and that these different styles come from different ideas of what art is. So these two different places have different ideas about what a painting should be like, what a painting should have in it, and what a painting does. And we'll talk about what they are right now. In 15th century Antwerp, a master blacksmith called Quentin Metzys fell in love with a painter's daughter. The father would not accept a son-in-law in such a profession, so Quentin sneaked into the painter's studio and painted a fly on his latest panel with such delicate realism that the master tried to swat it away before he realized what had happened. So now we move into 15th century Antwerp, and that's a place in Belgium. And the story that the author tells us now is about somebody called Quentin Metzys. And Metzys is a blacksmith, which means he works with metals, and he falls in love with the painter's daughter. Except the painter is like, you can't marry my daughter because this is not a profession that I think is very respectable. So what Quentin does is he decides to prove himself. He enters the painter's studio, and on the painter's most recent painting, that's what panel means, he paints a fly with such delicate realism. Delicate realism means that it's incredibly real down to the like details of it, and it's so real that the painter sort of just like enters the studio and tries to like smash the fly, and then he realizes that it's just painted. Quentin was immediately admitted as an apprentice into his studio. He married his beloved and went on to become one of the most famous painters of his age. And immediately the painter is like, okay, this man can paint, so clearly he is fit to marry my daughter. And so he sort of lets Quentin marry his daughter, and he takes Quentin in as an apprentice, somebody who will start to learn art and work with art. Quentin marries his daughter and then very much goes on to become a famous painter, right? So two different famous painters. We have Wu Dozi and we have Quentin Metzys. Two different stories that tell us two different things about art in China and in Belgium. These two stories illustrate what each form of art is trying to achieve. A perfect illusionistic likeness in Europe, the essence of inner life and spirit in Asia. And what Natalie Trobroy is trying to do by telling us both of these stories is point us to how both of these stories think about what good art is, right? And in Europe, good art is basically art that represents real life down to the T. The fly is extremely realistic, so realistic that you can mistake that fly for the real thing, which is what illusionistic means. You see something and you think it's really there when it's not. So that kind of perfection is what Europe appreciates. And in Asia, it's not really about imitating something to that kind of detail. Rather, it's about accessing some part of you that maybe you wouldn't have been able to access without that painting. So So the contrast that we're told is that in Europe, they care deeply for perfect illusionistic likeness or extremely accurately representative art. For instance, if I was going to draw my phone right now, I would draw my phone exactly as it is, and Europe would laud me as a good artist. But in Asia, if I drew my phone just as it is, they would be like, that's not quite enough. What you need to do is somehow in this painting, allow me to enter my mind and think. And we'll see like a little bit more about what that means here. I'm just going to check to see if you have any questions. Hello to Adarsh. Okay, I see. No questions, so I will carry on then. In the Chinese story, the emperor commissions a painting and appreciates its outer appearance, but the artist reveals to him the true meaning of his work. The emperor may rule over the territory he has conquered, but only the artist knows the way within. Let me show the way, the Tao, a word that means both the path or the method and the mysterious works of the universe. The painting is gone, but the artist has reached his goal, beyond any material appearance. So, in the Chinese story of Wu Daozi, what happens is the painter, paints this beautiful landscape painting, and the emperor looks at it, and the emperor is like, oh, it's really beautiful, except he can only appreciate it from the outside, right? And the artist is sort of like, there is more to this than just the outside. In fact, you can enter this painting, quite literally enter it. And the artist like shows us how he enters it literally, but the emperor can't follow. And what this has to do is the fact that the artist can enter his work means that he is capable of looking beyond just what's painted and really truly thinking about it, right? Art in China, as we'll find out in a little bit, but I think we need to know it now if we're going to be able to understand like what comes after this. Art in China, it is a way for you to kind of look within yourself, and to kind of go on the path, the Tao, as like the author tells us, along which you grow to understand the way that the universe works, right? The Tao is part of Taoism. It is again a spiritual philosophical discipline, and in it, what human beings need to achieve is the ability to be at perfect harmony with the universe, right? You can't be out of balance with the universe. In order to not be out of balance with the universe, you need to be capable of exploring yourself and understanding like yourself. And painting becomes like a way for you to achieve that kind of harmonious balance. And in order to like access that aspect of painting, which can let you develop that part of yourself which is in balance, you need to be like, you need to have the capacity to know that painting is about more than just like what's on the outside. But the emperor doesn't know it. So while the artist can like look beyond what is just outside and understand that the painting also gives him a way to kind of work towards this harmony, the emperor doesn't know that. And so what this tells us is that while the emperor may be the one who is in the material world in control over like all of those things the artist has painted, because the artist has probably painted places in China, right? So these are all like locations that the emperor is technically the ruler of. So he's in complete control of these places outside the painting. But when it comes to the actual painting itself, and when it comes to this territory of the soul, it's only the artist who knows how to enter, and the emperor fails to understand that there is more to the painting than just that depiction of his territory, and also the possibility of entering the territory of his soul if only he could think about the painting a little bit. And that's what we find out from this. I know that's probably a little bit confusing, but we'll lay it out a little bit more in detail as we go on to like the next paragraph. So when the painting disappears, the artist is okay with it because the artist is not there, first of all, and second of all, the artist is fine with it because the artist has achieved what he wanted to with his painting, which is he has learned to like go along the way or the Tao and try to understand the way the universe works. And that means a lot more than any sort of materialistic benefit. It means a lot more than just painting a good painting that looks good. And so we're told that the way means a lot more than materialistic things do. So the soul over like materialism. A classical Chinese landscape is not meant to reproduce an actual view as would a Western figurative painting. Whereas the European painter wants you to borrow his eyes and look at a particular landscape exactly as he saw it from a specific angle, the Chinese painter does not choose a single viewpoint. His landscape is not a real one, and you can enter it from any point, then travel in it. The artist creates a path for your eyes to travel up and down, then back again in a leisurely movement. So here what the author is doing is contrasting classical Chinese landscapes to European paintings and telling us exactly how they're different. So the European painter, she says, wants us to borrow his eyes, wants the viewer to look at a scene from his eyes, which is to say, if I'm the painter and I sit here and I paint what's in front of me, right? Then when I put up my painting, what I'm doing is I'm asking you to be me in this moment and look at the scene as I saw it, right? From this exact same angle, in this exact same lighting, with all the details like accurately representative of how I see them. So that's what's happening with European painting. But a Chinese painter doesn't do that. Chinese painter kind of puts multiple elements of like a scene together. So for instance, what I might do if I was a Chinese painter is I would take the sofa I'm sitting on and put it there. I might take like the keyboard that's here and put it there, something like that. You know, it won't be like extremely representative of how the world is. Rather, it will be like a set of components, and what you can do is you can look at any point of it and then you can make sense of all the rest of it, right? So for instance, if you look at the bottom left of my painting and it has a pillow in it, you can start there and sort of like go into like the different segments. Or if you're thinking about the Wudozi painting, then you can start with the river at the bottom and then sort of like trace your way up to the mountains. Or you can start with the mountains and then trace your way down to the river, right? Either way, it will make complete sense to you, and it's full of so many components that you'll need some time to kind of go up and down it, back again, and slowly sort of appreciate it and dwell in it. The author also tells us that classical Chinese painting is closer to Western figurative painting, and figurative painting is abstract painting. It's not accurate, it is rather a representation that is inaccurate. So for instance, if I was drawing like my hand, Western illusionistic like painting would want me to draw the hand exactly as it is. But maybe for like a Western figurative painting, what I do is I draw like a rectangle, another rectangle, another rectangle, another rectangle, like a little circle and another rectangle, and I'd leave like the viewer to like spend some time figuring out what I've drawn. You know, so looking at it, a viewer won't immediately be able to be like, that's a hand in this specific moment at this particular point of time. You know, so that's the difference between Western illusionistic painting and Western figurative painting. So here we're getting a sort of similarity between one form of art in China and one form of art in the West also. So it's not only contrasts, right? Another thing that we get from this paragraph is that idea that a Chinese landscape is not a real one. And what that means is basically that it's not real because it's not a perfect depiction of what is real, right? If I was going to draw you a real painting, which is to say something that completely captures what is in reality, then I would be doing what the European painter does and giving you like the exact details of everything as they are. But if it's not real, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to jumble up all of those things and make up like a new composition, a new landscape of my own. It won't be what is outside the painting exactly in the painting. Yeah, so that's what it means. And a third idea that we get from this is that Chinese painting thinks of a painting as a journey. Again, we know why this is. It's because it's supposed to be a way for you to access the path or the Tao, through which you kind of grow to understand the workings of the universe and achieve harmony with yourself. And so painting is a journey into your soul, into your spirit, rather than an imitation of what is outside or in the external environment. This is even more true in the case of the horizontal scroll, in which the action of slowly opening one section of the painting, then rolling it up to move on to the other, adds a dimension of time which is unknown in any other form of painting. It also requires the active participation of the viewer, who decides at what pace he will travel through the painting. Participation which is physical as well as mental. Okay, so a horizontal scroll is sort of, okay, I'm going to fold up like this sheet of paper so that you can maybe like get an idea of what a horizontal scroll is. So think about like something like this, right? And if this was the painting, a scroll is sort of rounded up rather than like folded up, so it would be like this actually, more accurately. So this would be a scroll, and what you do is you kind of like open it up bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, and then if like this was a proper horizontal painting, then you should be able to open like more of it, and then more of it, and then more of it, right? I only have this sheet of paper, so I can't show you that much, but yeah, that's how the horizontal scroll works. You have to like kind of roll it up and open it and roll it up and open it in order to see like the next side. And what this does is bring in the idea of time, the author says, which is to say, you can't look at the entire painting in one go, right? You need to like look at one segment of it, and then you need to look at another segment of it, and then you need to look at another segment of it. And it is actually not folded up in this way. So in the scroll, what you'll have to do is you'll have to roll up one thing that you've already looked at in order to look at the other. So you have to like focus on each bit when you're looking at it, and then close it and shift to another one. And that brings in you and your active participation, which is to say, you decide when like you want to roll it, you decide when to like stop looking at it, you decide like how long you're going to look at it. All of that is decided by you, and it's physical in the sense that the act of unrolling it is something that you're going to be doing, but it's also mental in the sense that you're going to be like expending mental energy on each of those sections, right? And why is that? Because the Chinese painter does not want you to borrow his eyes, he wants you to enter his mind. The landscape is an inner one, a spiritual and conceptual space. So the Chinese painter doesn't want you to like look at the painting, like if I'm unrolling it, I'm not just supposed to be looking at like, oh look, there is a mountain on this, and there is, oh, a river on like this segment. I'm supposed to be looking at it and sort of like trying to enter the soul, the inner spirit, the mind of the Chinese painter, because the Chinese painter has been putting a lot of thought into why the landscape is structured in this particular way. So you're going to be entering all of his thought processes. You're going to be entering like why this painting is set up in this specific way, which is to say, you're going to be thinking also about like what sorts of ideas the Chinese painter was thinking of when he put this in like this particular like construction, what sorts of ideas of the soul, what sorts of ideas of like the Tao and the spirit that he was thinking about when he put it into this particular composition. So all of that is going on, right? You're not just looking at something, you're trying to enter the process of the Chinese painter, and through that you're also going to try and access your own like inner soul, inner spirit. And it's interesting that the author tells us that the viewer matters here, and that participation matters. It's reminiscent of sort of a book, right? You flip through the pages of a book, and you kind of like choose when to finish reading what chapter. Movies, if you're watching them on like the big screen in like a movie theater, there's a lot less control there. You just kind of look at what's going on, but even so, you're still participating, you know. And so even when it comes to like Western art that is illusionistic, you're still participating, you're still looking at it and processing it. It's just that it's different kinds of participation, and according to the author, the extent of participation in Chinese art is a lot more, because you're forced to, by the very style of the art, stop and think about what's going on. Whereas when it comes to Western illusionistic painting, you might be tempted to look at it, say, oh, this landscape is beautiful, and then just move on, you know. So yeah, that's what she is trying to tell us here. And what this tells us also is that more than admiring the scenery, the Chinese painter wants you to think rather than depicting like what's outside. The Chinese painter wants you to consider your soul, and also like the path, the way, the Tao. This concept is expressed as Shan Shui, literally mountain water, which used together represent the word landscape. So in China, the word for landscape is Shan Shui, and Shan means mountain and Shui means water. They're both like two different characters, and both of these characters, when put together, make mountain water. And mountain water is the word that like means landscape. That sounds a little confusing. So Chinese characters like all mean something, right? So Shan is like A maybe, and it means something, unlike A, which is just like a letter for us. And so what Shan means is mountain, and Shui is another character, and it means water. So it's like putting together AB and it makes, or let's say it's like putting together AN and it makes an, right? And that means something. Similar to that, you put together Shan and Shui and it means mountain water, and that's what they use to talk about landscape. More than two elements of an image, these represent two complementary poles, reflecting the Taoist view of the universe. The mountain is Yang, reaching vertically towards heaven, stable, warm and dry in the sun, while the water is Yin, horizontal and resting on the earth, fluid, moist and cool. The interaction of Yin, the receptive feminine aspect of universal energy, and its counterpart Yang, active and masculine, is of course a fundamental notion of Taoism. So what the author is telling us here is that mountain water, which means landscape, it's not just referring to the fact that the landscape has images of mountains and waters in it, right? Which, you know, most landscape paintings do have like mountains and water in them. Whenever I've drawn landscape, I always remember like drawing a mountain and drawing like a river and like a little hut and generally like a person, you know. So just like that, the author is telling us it's not just that. It's not just the fact that landscape paintings contain a mountain and contain a water. Mountain and water here means something more than just like the physical entities of the mountain and the water. And this is also connected to Taoist philosophy. Taoism, the author tells us, is it believes in this idea that there are two energies in this world, and these two energies interact, and these two energies are opposite to each other, but they also come together to make a whole. This is what, oh sorry about that, this is what we know as, wait, I'm going to draw it for us here. You've probably seen this image. It's a very famous image. It's of Yin and Yang. Yeah. So one of this will be like completely white and one of this will be like completely black, you know. So yeah, that like idea of Yin and Yang as like two little things that kind of are opposite to each other because like they're completely different in what they mean to Taoism, but without like one, the other would be like hollow. You know, there wouldn't be enough of it. Together they come together into like that circle, which represents like wholeness, completeness, because the both are equally there. And so the author tells us that both of these energies are what Shan Shui represents. The mountain stands for Yang, which is the active masculine energy in the universe. And what the mountain means is all of these things, right? It's reaching towards the heavens, like mountain is reaching towards the heavens. It's stable, warm, dry. Stable because it doesn't move, very fixed. It's warm, dry. In the sun, maybe because it's closer to the sun, it's thought of as being warmer and drier. Whereas the water is yin, the river that like you draw. It's horizontal, it's on the earth, it's not reaching towards heaven. It's horizontal, not vertical. It's fluid, unlike the mountain, which is, you know, stable. It's moving, rivers move. It's moist, unlike the dry mountain, and it's cool, unlike the warm mountain, right? So opposing like characteristics. And yin, we're also told, is the receptive feminine aspect of energy. So one part of the universal energy is active and masculine, and one part is the receiver, and it's feminine. That comes with like certain like gender connotations today, but this is how like Taoism thinks about like yin yang. And so we also get the sense that the painting from the very beginning, like the very idea of landscape art, even the words that they use to talk about landscape art, are deeply embedded in Taoism, right? Ideas of Taoism seem to be what are intrinsically sort of connected to the idea of landscape painting, even to like the very word landscape. Yeah. What is often overlooked is an essential third element, the middle void where their interaction takes place. This can be compared with the yogic practice of pranayama. Breathe in, retain, breathe out. The suspension of breath is the void where meditation occurs. The middle void is essential. Nothing can happen without it. Hence the importance of the white, unpainted space in Chinese landscape. So the third element is the one that everybody forgets about. It's not just these two elements that are important to Taoism. The third one is something called the middle void, and that is also important to Taoism. And what is the middle void? It's just the space in which yin and yang come together, right? And the author compares this to like the practice of pranayama. Pranayama is when you draw breath in through one nose and you let it out through the other. Except when you breathe in, there is inevitably like a moment when you have to pause and then you breathe out. So there's a moment when the breath is just in you, and that moment is the void, she tells us, and that moment is like empty space, right? It's neither the breathing in nor the breathing out. It's just an empty moment, a hollow moment, and it's the space in which meditation takes place, in which you contemplate, in which you think, and through which you can achieve like a balance of like yin and yang. And the author tells us that the middle void is crucial because without that meditation and without like that space in which like the yin and yang can come together, nothing can happen. And in Chinese painting, the middle void is represented through white unpainted space because it has nothing in it. The suspension of breath has like no breath in it, right? The breath is in you, but you're not doing anything with it, so it's empty, hollow. And so just like that, there is white unpainted space in the painting to represent the middle void. So it's sort of a paused moment when really there isn't like activity going on or receiving going on. You're in a moment of stillness, sort of like the Keeping Quiet poem by Pablo Neruda. You're in a moment of stillness and you're contemplating. And the white space and the middle void become like a great way for us to think about how painting takes from philosophy, right? Here it's very apparent that like this white space exists in Chinese landscape just because of the idea of the middle void. So philosophy has influenced painting and caused this particular way of painting to exist. This is also where man finds fundamental role. In that space between heaven and earth, he becomes the conduit of communication between both poles of the universe. His presence is essential even if it's only suggested. Far from being lost or oppressed by the lofty peaks, he is, in Francois Cheng's wonderful expression, the eye of the landscape. And the middle void is where human beings become important. How so? Human beings become sort of like the space for heaven, which is Yang, the mountain, and earth, which is Yin, the water, to connect, right? They're both apart from each other, but human beings are like in between them, and human beings like live on earth and aspire to heaven, you could say. And so because of that, like, they become the means through which heaven and earth end up connected. And so they're essential because human beings also start to act sort of like the middle void, the space that connects this and that. So yin, yang and yin. And that's why human beings are important, the author tells us. And she's talking not only about like real life, right? Though she is also talking about real life. She's talking about in the painting. And she's saying in the painting, like there's generally some trace of like man in the painting that Chinese painters put in. It could be like actual people in the painting, or it could be just a suggestion of human life, like maybe a fire, or maybe like cattle attached to a cart, or something like that, which suggests human beings are around. And this is important because it is the eye of the landscape. What does that mean? Why is human beings, or why are human beings or signs of human beings the eye of the landscape? Because it is also our point of entry into it, right? We look at it and we are sort of like, we're people. So when we look at it, they become like our point of entry with the painting also. And so in that sense, human beings become crucial in the painting. They also become crucial because they're what like connect earth and heaven for us even within the painting. Without like the indication of the person there, something again is lost for us when we're looking at the painting. We maybe like forget to like think about how like we're supposed to be trying to work our way through the Tao and like achieve this sort of balance between yin and yang. So we see that people also take on relevance in Chinese paintings, and they become in fact very much the eye of the landscape, which is to say that they become maybe our eyes. Our eyes like go to them and look through their eyes to look at the landscape. The eye of the landscape also to say that their eyes are in the landscape, and they become like ways for us to think about how they could be navigating like the spaces in the landscape to like work through into that balance. So all of those meanings sort of come together. The one thing you should really take away from this paragraph is that human beings are like relevant to these paintings, and they are relevant to these paintings because they connect yang and yin, and they're also a way for us to connect with the painting. So the key, the heart of the landscape becomes human beings, because again the landscape is not really about like admiring the mountains and the water, but thinking about human life and human spirit. That brings us to the end of the story, and let's talk a couple of themes that are quite important. And the themes are, first, our like primary theme is the idea that like different places have like different styles of art, right? And different cultures like shape those different styles of art. So China has these philosophies which lead to like that particular kind of art being preferred. It shapes how people will paint in that country. It shapes how painting will be regarded in that country, and it also shapes what we appreciate, right? Chinese people will appreciate a very different kind of art than say Western people will appreciate. And there's therefore a requirement for us to be sort of open to different styles of painting, like the author who comes from Belgium and learns and understands about Chinese painting. and so grows to appreciate them for what they are also. This is sort of like if you're reading like a romance novel, then you can't be disappointed that the romance novel doesn't have adventure in it, you know, because then you should be reading an adventure novel instead. So when you're reading an adventure novel, you like look to see if the novel like actually does adventure well, and if you're reading a romance novel, then you look to see if the romance novel does romance well. And that's what it means to be able to appreciate like each genre of art, each style of art for whatever it wants to do. And that's something that the story gives us. And very finally, it tells us that the paintings are an entry into the painter's minds, but also an entry into our own very souls. And that should bring us to the end of that part of the lesson. There's also like a little box that's there in like this lesson, and let's read it really quickly. Getting Inside Outsider Art by Brenda Suri. When French painter Jean Dubuffet mooted the concept of art brut in the 1940s, the art of the untrained visionary was of minority interest. From its almost veiled beginnings, outsider art has gradually become the fastest growing area of interest in contemporary art internationally. In the 1940s, Jean Dubuffet came up with this concept of art brut, and art brut is art of like people who are not trained, you know, who haven't gone to school for art. And though in the beginning it was almost veiled, so almost completely hidden, almost irrelevant, it has eventually become like one of the most fastest growing fields of art. This genre is described as the art of those who have no right to be artists, as they have received no formal training, yet show talent and artistic insight. Their works are a stimulating contrast to a lot of mainstream offerings. So art brut is art by people who, as I said, haven't gone to school for art, so they've not like learned any of the mainstream like ways to paint, right? They're just like picking up things and doing things however they want to, which means inevitably that they'll be making fresh kinds of work that aren't in line like with previous like ways of how people thought they should paint. And so it provides like new things on the art scene for people to look at, and it's different from what is conventionally made because they have not been conventionally trained. And what these paragraphs give us is the idea of who has the right to make art, right? And the suggestion that like art has been like, there have been boundaries in art, restrictions in art. Some people have not been allowed to like learn art or do art simply because like of a variety of reasons. Probably maybe they didn't have access to art schools, maybe they had to do other things in their lives out of necessity, like Quentin Metzes, who we saw was a blacksmith professionally, but who clearly could paint like really well, right? So the entire context of art as being like filled with this kind of push and pull with regard to certain groups of people shows up. Around the time Dubuffet was propounding this concept, in India an untutored genius was creating paradise. Years ago, the little patch of jungle that he began clearing to make himself his garden sculpted with stone and recycled material is known to the world today as the Rock Garden at Chandigarh. So around the same time that Dubuffet is kind of talking about art brut, in India there is an artist who is very much practicing art brut. It is someone called Nek Chand, and what he does is he takes up this like little space of jungle and he clears it up and he makes art with stone and recycled material. And back then it wasn't very famous, but today it's known to the entire world as the Rock Garden, and it's in Chandigarh. Its 80-year-old creator director Nek Chand is now hailed as India's biggest contributor to outsider art. The 50th issue of Raw Vision, a UK-based magazine pioneer in outsider art publications, features Nek Chand and his Rock Garden sculpture Women by the Waterfall on its anniversary issue's cover. So Nek Chand is the person who came up with this art garden, as I said, and he is now thought of as the biggest contributor to outsider art in India, to art brut in India. And he is so popular that an art magazine called Raw Vision, which is dedicated to only looking at art brut, features him on its 50th anniversary edition. The notion of art brut or raw art was of works that were in their raw state as regards cultural and artistic influences. Anything and everything from a tin to a sink to a broken down car could be material for a work of art, something Nek Chand has taken to dizzying heights. So art brut, it's called raw art because all of the things that are being used and all of the ways in which this art is being produced as yet don't have like any kind of historical like value behind them, right? They haven't like made any kind of deep cultural impact. They haven't like gotten like you can't like for instance say, oh, this painter is the one I was influenced by, because there isn't enough of a history in art brut for you to say that. So there isn't much of like artistic influence. It's still quite a new field, quite a fresh field. It hasn't like, it's creating footprints in front of it, and there aren't like many things to look back at to trace like your lineage of art from, and that's what like that particular first line means. And art brut uses like anything to make art, tins, sinks, broken down cars, anything at all. Recognizing his art as an outstanding testimony of the difference a single man can make when he lives his dream, the Swiss Commission for UNESCO will be honouring him by way of a European exposition of his works. The 5-month interactive show, Realm of Nek Chand, beginning October, will be held at leading museums in Switzerland, Belgium, France and Italy. The biggest reward is walking through the garden and seeing people enjoy my creation, Nek Chand says. So the Swiss Commission for UNESCO is the United Nations committee which is in charge of educational, social and cultural like work. And what it does is it says that his work is incredible, and in fact his work is indicative of how if a single person like decides to live their dream, they can really make something incredibly beautiful, incredibly amazing like Nek Chand has. So because of that, UNESCO has basically decided to do a European exhibition of his work, and it's going to be held in a lot of museums. It's going to be called Realm of Nek Chand, and Nek Chand says what I'm taking like a lot of delight in is being able to see other people see my things and take joy in it. So he finds his like happiness in watching other people appreciate his work. And why I wanted to talk about this is because it isn't necessary to put this box at the end of like the landscape of the soul article, right? But they have put it there, and they put it there because they're trying to tell us that art, is really cropping up like different things and different ideas of like what art is all the time. There are like multiple fields that are showing up, and very often like we don't appreciate new fields that are showing up because our standards are based on what we know, which is the past. And so because we restrain ourselves to those standards that we have, very often we fail to appreciate like new fresh things that show up in front of us, different things that show up in front of us. And that's something that this article is telling us, and it's telling us also that hey, maybe like we should try to be more open and again look at what each art style is trying to do and appreciate it for that, right? And also it points out to us the idea that art is regulated, that there is politics to art, that for instance what gets appreciated in art has a lot to do with say what popular art today is. And that doesn't mean that other art isn't necessarily good. It just means we need to develop an eye for appreciating art for what it's trying to do, rather than imposing the standard of like one popular idea of what art is onto all kinds of art, right? And that's something this entire article also is trying to tell us. It's trying to tell us, don't just look at like perfect paintings that are like representations of the real world and think this is how paintings should be. There are other ways to do paintings, other ways to think about them, and it's trying to introduce us to one way that is different to think about art. Yeah, that brings us to the end of the lesson. Thank you for listening if you listen to this later. If you liked it, then let me know. If you have any feedback, then let me know. I would very much appreciate it. Couple of things I want to tell you about Unacademy before I leave. One, there is an Unacademy app on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. You can download it from there. It's called the Unacademy Learners app, and it has a lot of really cool features ranging from quizzes to live tests to the Ask a Doubt feature, using which you can basically like ask any kind of doubt that you have. And you can ask like things before your exams, which means that it will help with your revision prep. You can also ask like things about concepts that you've learned in school that maybe aren't clear to you. So take advantage of this Ask a Doubt feature. I think it'd be really helpful. And you can try it for like no cost. It's absolutely free. This is how you use the Ask a Doubt feature. You basically just like click on Ask a Doubt after you download the app. You take a picture of your doubt and then you basically crop it to like highlight like which part of like the image is the doubt that you have, and then you choose the subject that the question falls under. Then you'll receive the solution very soon. There's also something called Unacademy Plus that Unacademy offers, and this is a sort of expanded version of YouTube classes. Unlike how on YouTube we do like regular sessions that are like this and we cover your syllabus, on Unacademy Plus there's a lot more detailed coverage of syllabus. There are a lot more tests. There's a lot more like study material that you will get from what we teach you. And there are also doubt clearing sessions and answer writing sessions, which means that you will get to like meet the educators and ask your doubts and kind of get practice in how to write answers for your exams. These are the costs of Unacademy Plus, and they're different for different durations of time. You can sort of like choose whichever works best for you, but you should keep in mind that the per month cost is a lot less if you take the subscription for a lot longer. There's also something called Unacademy Iconic, which is kind of like alternative education. Basically, you kind of get to like learn everything one-on-one. You won't have to be in a classroom with another group of people. You get to like, it's like school just for you, in the sense that it's just going to be you and the educator learning together. So a lot more individualized attention is what you'll get. You'll also get like weekly reports on how you're doing, and your parents can be in contact with the educators, and your doubts will get cleared again individually. So a lot of focus on you, and if that's what you're interested in, then Unacademy Iconic prices are these. Again, you can take the Iconic subscription for any duration of time, but if you take it for longer, then it will cost a lot less per month, so you should keep that in mind. I think today is also the last day for like a price drop, not a spice drop, sorry, a price drop offer. Basically, if you take the subscription today, then if you take it for like 9 months, then you get an extra like 5% discount. If you take it for 12 months or longer than 12 months, then you get an extra 10% discount. And of course, there's always the usual discount, which is the referral code, and mine is THBR01, and it will give you a 10% flat discount on these subscriptions. Thank you for being here with me on the Unacademy platform on YouTube today. Do leave a like if you like today's session. Do share if you think that it would be of benefit to other people. And definitely subscribe if you're interested in content like this, because I'm making content like this for you all the time. I'll see you again tomorrow with the photograph. And that should bring us to a close on our lessons in Hornbill.